Day 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Good evening. Welcome along to Neil Oliver Live on GB News TV and on radio. Tonight I'll be speaking to Professor Jeremy Black about proposals to decolonise the history curriculum. I'll be joined by the Reverend William Phillip, Senior Minister of the Tron Church in Glasgow, to discuss the relevance of Easter in modern times. I am, of course, as always, joined by my brilliant panel, political consultant Emma Burnell, and personal finance expert and commentator Jasmine Birtles. Hello to you both. Plus, our Great Britain tonight is Michael Olaf, and he is running just the 215 miles to raise money for the Epilepsy Society. All of that coming up tonight, plus news of, get this, the oldest gorilla in the UK. But first, an update on the latest news headlines.
Thank you, Neil. I'm Miranda Shunker in the GB newsroom. Russia has banned the UK Prime Minister, Foreign Secretary, Defence Secretary and Scotland's First Minister from entering the country. The Foreign Ministry announced Boris Johnson, Liz Truss, Ben Wallace and Nicola Sturgeon are all barred from now, along with 9 other government members and politicians. Moscow says unprecedented hostile action by the British government is the reason behind the move. Officials in Ukraine say over 1,400 people were evacuated through humanitarian corridors today, as explosions continued on the outskirts of the capital Kiev and the cities of Lviv and Kharkiv. President Zelensky has been presenting soldiers with medals at a ceremony, but says around 3,000 of his troops have been killed since the beginning of Russia's invasion. In a phone call, Volodymyr Zelensky updated Boris Johnson on the situation on the ground this afternoon. Meanwhile, a Ukrainian defence official says Russia's navy is continuing to block the port in the besieged city of Mariupol.
A full-scale armed aggression of the Russian Federation against our state is going on. In the waters of the Sea of Azov, an enemy ship grouping continues to carry out tasks to block the port of Mariupol. Due to the presence of Russian warships armed with sea-launched cruise missiles in the Black Sea, there's an increased threat.
Well, in other news, more than 6,000 migrants have crossed the Channel to British shores so far this year. Over 3,000 came in March alone, 4 times more than the number recorded in the same month last year. The Navy took over operational command of handling those attempting the journey on Thursday as part of the planned transfer of asylum seekers to Rwanda. It's as the Home Secretary claims other countries could copy the UK's proposals, despite the UN Refugee Agency branding them illegal. 6 protesters have been arrested after climate change activists targeted an oil tanker in central London. Extinction Rebellion say a number of people, including Olympic gold medalist Etienne Stott and fellow British Olympian Laura Baldwin, climbed onto the Shell tanker this morning. Anti-far-right protests have turned violent in Paris. Police have fired tear gas at demonstrators against presidential candidate Marine Le Pen in the Place de la République. The election campaign is entering its final week between Ms Le Pen and the current incumbent, Emmanuel Macron. And 3 Chinese astronauts are back in Beijing after a 6-month stay on the nation's space station. The Shenzhou 13 return capsule re-entered the Earth's atmosphere this morning, touching down in North China's Inner Mongolia. The crew are now undergoing rehab treatment as they become reaccustomed to gravity after half a year in space, the longest in China's history. Well, you're up to date on TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Now it's back to Neil.
Remember 2019? Cast your mind back to that year, that oh-so-recent time when everything was different. 2019 was not a perfect time or a perfect world, but it was very different from this one of 2022. In 2019, the rights and freedoms we'd had for years and shamefully taken for granted were still broadly intact, or so it seemed. The idea that we might not be free to be with loved ones, to hold the hand of a dying parent, to earn a living, to leave our homes for more than an hour a day, that taking a holiday abroad would be for a time illegal, would surely have been unthinkable. As long as we could afford the necessary ticket, we had been free to travel the world. Surgical masks were a novelty then, worn in places of work by medical professionals and by occasional visitors from Asia, where altogether different cultural norms prevailed. Across the pond, Donald Trump was in the White House. The US were energy independent then and hadn't got involved in any new wars all the time he was in residence. European states even sneered when he warned against their reliance on Russian gas. The list of things that were different about here and the US and the rest of the West in 2019 could be so much longer, of course, almost endless in fact, but I don't have enough time. So where are we now? Where to begin? For one thing, by now there is a whole new definition of haves and have-nots. Society is split across the divide of the vaccinated and unvaccinated. A large majority of the population of the UK and of the rest of the West have been vaccinated against a disease many now believe to have been made in a Chinese lab that had been funded by the US. It leaked from there in 2019 to the wider world. The have-nots, who chose not to take the vaccine, who are increasingly glad they turned down the multiple offers of multiple jabs, but now metaphorically bruised and battered as a consequence of their resistance to the regime, are still vilified and called anti-vaxxers. Anyone questioning the vaccines and or lockdown is still branded a conspiracy theorist. There are many other consequences of the advent of the disease and those vaccines, but again, I don't have the time now. I will note that there are widespread reports that young athletes at the peak of their games and fitness have died of heart attacks and blood clots in the last 2 years, and that youngsters from all walks of life have been diagnosed with myocarditis and other serious conditions during the same period, but as I say, no time to get into that now. Among the most eye-catching revelations has been the rabid enthusiasm displayed by governments from one side of the European continent to the other, and in Canada, Australia, New Zealand and many more places besides, for high-handed curtailing of citizens' rights. The pressure to submit to the experimental vaccines, for example, was almost unbearable to resist. In one country after another, the lives of the unvaccinated were made more and more uncomfortable, impossible. Unvaccinated Canadians still cannot travel within their own country, far less leave their country. The Australian government has only just relented and allowed, I say allowed as though such control was ever right and proper, allowed Australians to flee the prison island. The nominal leader of the free world is President Joe Biden, a frail and infirm elderly man, visibly cognitively compromised. Some say Mr. Biden has senile dementia, but I'm not in the business of medical diagnosis. Last week there was a sad and worrying clip of him. There are endless sad and worrying clips of President Biden finishing a speech and turning to leave the podium. After a few uncertain moments, he stopped and stuck out his right hand towards the left. This has been interpreted by some as an attempt to shake hands with someone who wasn't there. To me, it looked like he simply was trying to remember whether he should exit to left or right. He turned his back on the audience then and walked uncertainly with tiny steps towards the backdrop provided by the US flag. After a further agony of moments, he turned again and made his way shakily to the right. For another elderly man in another context, it would only have been sad, a glimpse of terminal decline. For another elderly man so lost, there might have been rescue by a loved one, a guiding arm around the shoulders. But this is the leader of the free world who must cope alone before the eyes of that world. Perhaps Mr. Biden's decline is a metaphor for a new reality for the US. The years during which she was generally accepted as dominant in all things, economical, political, cultural, may be drawing to a close. And then, of course, there is the present chaos and, we are told, looming threat of catastrophe. We have war in Europe of the sort we have not had for decades between Russia and Ukraine, and excited talk from some of the imminent use of nuclear weapons. Compared to that lost world of 2019, so near and yet so hopelessly far, this is very different indeed. The years of lockdown that were our government's offering when it came to keeping us safe from the disease have caused economic mayhem, such as has not been known in the West for a lifetime. Add to that the insanity of carbon net zero and all the sleights of hand concerning renewables, technologies made of interest to industry only by additional tax heaped onto consumers to subsidise wind farms and the rest of the money pits, and so create the illusion they might realistically replace gas, coal and oil. As a direct consequence of all that, lockdowns and net zero, the news is all about unavoidable shortages of food and energy and massive hikes in the price of both. There is talk of rationing and blackouts. Rationing and blackouts are hardly new, but they're unfamiliar to most of the generations alive today. 2022 is a very different place in so many ways. Inflation, dark talk of interest rate hikes. Millions must live in fear of losing everything, their homes included. As it turns out, 2019 was the last year when the governments of the West could even pretend that the world in which they had us living, a world of debt and funny money, outsourced production and manufactured dependence on imported energy, was in any way sustainable. What we're witnessing now is only chickens coming home to roost. What we're experiencing is the consequence of those governments and their bankers burning down the old house and moving themselves into the only addresses worth living in the new one to come. Routine now too is talk of digital IDs, a method of electronically tagging every man, woman and child, an intrusion into privacy and individuality that was once unthinkable and roundly dismissed by politicians, including our Prime Minister Boris Johnson, has in 2022 the feel of something inevitable. Like lockdowns and vaccines and the rest, digital IDs are increasingly a feature, an innovation we are told will be for the greater good. Claims about the greater good used to be the favoured justification only of totalitarian regimes. They still are. From 2019 to 2022, such a brief blink of time, and yet so great a void has been created between the world of then and the world of now. Back then, we still trusted that our opinions mattered. But now, here's the thing. The fitness or not of President Biden for the role of leader of the free world is debated everywhere. I watched the latest clip of him tottering around, so apparently lost and confused, and realised that while the jury is out on his mental capacity, something else goes unremarked. It doesn't seem to matter that the world is watching the President of the United States so enfeebled, so vulnerable. It doesn't seem to matter either about his son, Hunter Biden's laptop, the one most of the US media invited us to dismiss as Russian propaganda. Of course, if such a laptop belonging to a son of Donald Trump had come to light before Trump was elected, it would have been the end of him. There would have been wall-to-wall media coverage of its contents, not least the references of payments made from shady deals to the big guy. But any mention of Hunter Biden's laptop was suppressed out of existence by big tech. For the duration of his presidency, Mr. Trump was dogged with Democrat claims he colluded with Russia to seize power. All of those claims were proven false. Democrats, media and tech giants got away with a cover-up. They got away with smearing the president. The world knows it was a smear, followed by a cover-up, and yet it has had no consequences for any of the perpetrators. If one thing hasn't changed from 2019 until now, it is apparently the corrupt behaviour of so much of the world's media. That it doesn't matter that we know that Biden is failing, that big tech and others colluded to suppress the truth and effect a US election reminded me of the ongoing farce labelled Partygate. Whatever has or has not happened in the aftermath of internal inquiries, it's evident they broke their own rules. It's also clear they didn't fear the disease. While the rest of the population was missing weddings and funerals, leaving loved ones to die alone, the politicians and their advisors were secure in the knowledge that get-togethers posed no risk at all. Most important of all, They know we know all that and have the gall to think it shouldn't matter. I don't care if Rishi Sunak has sworn loyalty to another state while our Chancellor of the Exchequer. I don't care how much tax his wife pays or doesn't. I care that they seem to think none of it matters. This is a recurrent feature of 2022, perhaps the most important of the many ways in which the world of 2022 is so different from the world of 2019. Millions of ordinary, law-abiding, reasonable tax-paying people in one country after another have noticed how different their world has been made without their consent. Those millions, though roundly abused by the authorities and ridiculed and shouted down from all sides, have shouted back, defiant. Loud has been the cry that the emperors are not wearing any clothes, but nothing has happened because our seeing and knowing and shouting about it isn't deemed to matter. However, it's only the emperors and those telling the emperors what to say and do who think it doesn't matter. What has been done these past 2 years or so does matter. It's the most important point of all. Millions of us have seen it and will always remember. In the end, when all is said and done, what we have seen and understood about our leaders and the world we live in will matter a very great deal indeed. All of that is only my opinion, of course, and you're free to disagree. Keep your tweets and emails coming all through the show. You can email gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet @gbnews. I'll try to get to as many as possible of your comments as the show proceeds. I'm here with political consultant Emma Burnell and personal finance expert Jasmine Birtles. Jasmine, I'll come to you first, if I may. Did you see that clip of Biden? And if so, how did it strike you?
I'm just seeing it now for the first time. And yes, it's exactly as you've said. You want to go and look after him. You want to just put a hand out and go, it's all right, lovey, this way. No, don't worry. But this, as you say, is the leader of the free world. And I think about all of the ones that we've had, over the last 20 years. And each time you think, golly, it couldn't get any worse. but this time, you think back to George W. Bush and think, well, he was fairly together, really. At the time, I really didn't think so. But here, we have somebody who is literally just being treated like a puppet. He's just a front, and goodness knows what's going on behind. It's worrying as well as being upsetting.
Emma, do you see what I mean when I say they're just letting us watch this elderly man who clearly is beyond his responsibilities, and it doesn't seem to matter that we're watching it?
I would politely disagree, and that's what we're here for, joy of opinions, as you say. Biden is an old guy, and he's physically frailer than a younger man. That doesn't mean that he's cognitively frailer. And I think one of the clear things that we have that's so different in the Biden White House than the Trump White House is a massive team who know how to do their jobs. And that is the responsibility of the guy at the top. And frankly, I am so relieved that we have professionals back in the room, as opposed to the weird roundabout, the carousel of nonsense, the in, out, shake it all about, nobody knowing what the hell they were doing we had under Trump.
You're not in any way troubled by the appearance of the leader of the free world. I mean,
no, because I don't think he needs to be a macho idiot.
He doesn't have to be a macho idiot, but you would want him to be able to speak clearly, to put together thoughts.
Well, I've had 4 years of not being possible before Biden. So, yeah, I'd love to have someone who had the eloquence of Obama back. That would be lovely.
But Biden seems to speak in word salads.
We had George Bush, who constantly tripped over his own tongue. Trump couldn't start a sentence without finishing it 20 minutes later on a completely different note. Biden, he also makes mistakes. I'm not going to say that I could sit in a Biden speech and come out feeling the way I do after listening to Obama, but I'm also not going to say that this is something new and revolutionary we've never seen before in a president.
Jasmine, do you feel he's beyond it?
Well, I do, like you said, actually, I tend to agree with you that it's worrying, because this isn't the only example of it. You've had him not knowing what he was saying, you know, a few times. And I do know, I've got a lot of friends who are Democrats, and, you know, when I ask them, are you happy? And they go, no, they're not. They're embarrassed, frankly. And I think, you know, Democrats are embarrassed. The country itself is embarrassed. And we, as part of the West, you know, we look up essentially to the leader of the free world. We're part of that in a weird way, although we don't elect him. He's kind of connected to us. We find it, I think a lot of people in this country and Europe find it slightly embarrassing and upsetting and worrying to see him not coping, frankly.
Emma, to move away from Mr. Biden and to matters closer to home, the point I was trying to make about Partygate, there does seem to be, politicians have for a long time been very arrogant and shameless in the face of revealed wrongdoing. There's nothing new about that, but it seems to be reaching a sharper pitch now. I mean,
we've never had someone who's had a criminal sanction in number 10 before, whilst being Prime Minister. That is new. I feel that the arrogance that is oozing, and not just from... If it was just Boris Johnson, then the Tories could do something about it. That it has clearly spread to a number of other players, including his leading rival for the crown, Rishi Sunak. It just speaks to this sense that has perforated the Conservative Party, that they are above what the little people have to do. Now, you and I will disagree over the COVID measures, over vaccinations. Where I think we might well agree is that it makes it much, much harder to impose any rules like that if the people at the top are so flagrantly not doing them themselves.
What about, to move it away from the Conservative Party? Let's look at the opposition. The flopping around on the issue of the transgender debate. What is a woman? Can a woman have a penis? Can a man have a cervix? All of that. I would have thought 5 years ago, in a leader of the opposition, an unwillingness or an inability to give a straight answer to such a fundamental question would have been intolerable. And yet, once again, it doesn't seem to matter. And it's not just Keir Starmer, it's Annalise Dodds, it's others besides who are flip-flopping on the same issue. And it doesn't... I worry that they can see, they know that we are watching them be disrespectful around the truth, dismissive of our opprobrium, and it doesn't seem to bother them.
I mean, I think they are making the biggest pig's ear of this issue. I mean, you just cannot. And there are some who are doing better than others. Wes Streeting gave a very straight answer when asked. Answered it very well. Thank God he's the shadow health secretary. One day to be health secretary, presumably. It's as an issue, it's tearing the Labour Party apart. But what's really tearing the Labour Party apart is the fact that they just look like they can't give a straight answer. And you're right, they might give an answer that would upset me and annoy me, but at least I'd know, oh, this is where we stand. Mm-hmm. And I would much rather actually that than this constant shilly-shallying and not being able to say, this is what I think. This is what I think is the first thing any politician should be able to say.
And Jasmine, just quickly before we go to a break, my contention that our opinions don't matter or matter less. What's your feedback on that assertion?
Yeah, it's a very good point. I think it's true. And I think the whole shift of interest has moved, as you've mentioned, from us as individuals, as consumers, as citizens, to us as numbers, as creatures that need to be tracked, creatures that need to be kept down, creatures that need to have their ID imprinted all over the place, not actually sentient human beings. And I'm going back also thinking about what Yuval Harari has said at the World Economic Forum, that there's no free will anymore, there's no God, you're going to do what technology tells you to do. And I think that is where our lords and masters, whoever they are trying to move us to be. We are literally, we are a number. That's all bits on a screen.
Yes, I think rather than being served by governments, we're being ruled by petty despots. Moving on, after the break, Professor Jeremy Black will be here to discuss proposals to decolonise the history curriculum.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back to Neil Oliver Live, and you've been getting in touch already following the first part of the show. I should make space for some of that now. Jake via Twitter says, pleased to see GB News touching on what is in essence the Great Reset. This needs more eyes and ears. Everything from the last 2 years points to this. Corrupt global governments, bankers and big tech all colluding. Terry via email, Neil, I'm no fan of Biden, but at least he's stumped up an enormous amount of resources for Ukraine and still doing that, compared with Germany, more worried about their fuel dependence on Russia, and France. What a choice between Macron and Le Pen. Jason via email, hi Neil, we are still here, decent, law-abiding and good, kind people. I'm delighted to hear that. And Jocelyn via email, please stop talking about the West as the free world. What free world, for goodness sake, says Jocelyn. It died definitely 2 years ago, if not before. Okay. Now, is modern British history little more than a catalogue of white supremacist, imperialist and colonialist abuse of the world around us? That could easily be the impression to be gained by anyone looking on at the ideological warfare raging through academic institutions in recent years, here and abroad. Calls to, quote, decolonise the history curriculum, close quote, among others, are deafeningly loud. The most strident demand a root and branch reassessment of our understanding of Britain's role and behaviour in the past. My next guest, Jeremy Black, Emeritus Professor of History at Exeter University, joins me now to assess how much trouble British history is supposed to be in. Good evening, Professor. Thank you for joining us.
Good evening, Neil.
This is a very troubling or fascinating topic, I suppose, depending on your point of view. Could we start, perhaps, if I ask you, what exactly is meant by decolonising the history curriculum?
Well, decolonisation is a rhetoric, a politically charged rhetoric, which seeks to, as it were, challenge the way in which we look at the past and we look at our present identity by presenting us as, in a very hostile light. I mean, it has to be said that many of those who support decolonisation are, as it were, the intellectual children of the left during the Cold War, and it's another, as it were, iteration of that kind of ideology.
To what extent, if any, would you say British history, as it has been taught is guilty of the charges levelled against it?
Well, I think it's a bit ridiculous. Can I just say, I sat on the panel under Michael Gove that revised the national curriculum in the early teens, and that was vilified by the left, by people like Simon Sharma, David Cannadine, Richard Evans, the potentates of the profession, all of whom have now collected knighthoods from this system they seem to decry, and they have argued that the national curriculum was a kind of overly favourable national story. Well, this is a ridiculous approach. First of all, I think it's sensible that people who live in a country understand its own history. There is nothing wrong with that. It is, in fact, a very sensible approach. But secondly, it is completely misleading to argue that the national curriculum sought to ignore the rest of the world. That was certainly not its content. It was not the content of the initial national curriculum drawn up by the Conservative government after the Kenneth Baker Act of 1988, nor is it true of the revision. But I'm afraid to say that, as it were, people read the headline abuse and they think that that is what has been going on. What I would say personally, and I've written, I think, several histories of England, the British Isles, and indeed British imperial history, what I would say is that on the whole, despite the efforts of the Gove reforms, I think that many teachers, particularly at the university level, pump out a very hostile and misleading account both of British history and of the British Empire.
Shouldn't British imperialism and colonisation be set against the context of the time, which is to say when there were other imperial powers in the same space, like Denmark and the Netherlands and France and the USA? Why is I appreciate the perceived necessity to paint a more honest picture, but in so doing, it seems inadequate to single out Britain as though we were the only empire behaving in an imperial fashion at that time.
Well, you're absolutely right, Neil, and there were also non-Western empires, places like China, for example, just as there are non-Western empires today. But, I mean, it is silly to characterise the British Empire, which, after all, was an entity that lasted for over 350 years. It's silly to categorise it as one simple phenomenon. You could argue that there were episodes in imperial history of this country or any other country that we would not support at the present moment, but we're not talking about that. What we're talking about is the variety of Britain's interaction with the world, and that interaction included what was known as informal empire, which was primarily trade. It included empire of colonisation. It included empire of influence. It was a whole range of activities. But I'm afraid that kind of range and that kind of complexity is not what is attractive to those people who just want to throw stones at British history.
Professor, I'll broaden this out to my guests in the studio, if I may. Emma, what's your reaction to what is undoubtedly happening in academia at the moment, this push to decolonise? Do you think it's appropriate? Do you think it's excessive? Do you think it's self-flagellating?
I don't think it's excessive or self-flagellating. I think some of the language is self-defeating. I think some of the ways that it's discussed, both by those who are in favour and against, is more heat than light rhetoric. But as the entire premise of your show and your opening monologue was about asking questions of what we think we know, surely that extends to our history. If history is written by the winners, as the cliche goes, surely it should be questioned by all of us. And that in learning how to learn is really important. So I don't think it's up to university professors to say this is, I think we need to say these are the facts of what happened. Now let's explore the impact of those facts. And that could be explored from many different perspectives. And I think what the best intentioned part of this is trying to do is to broaden those perspectives from the more traditional Britannia rules the waves perspective that existed for so long.
What do you think, Jasmine? Because I wonder if what, a lot of what's happening now isn't just the unleashing of an appetite among some modern academics to simply say, I wish the people in the past had been more like us, and then the world would be a better place, which seems like just an exercise in futility.
Yes, I think there's that it feels like politics of hatred, but I think, as you said, the best intention element is to broaden it out and to go, there's no one size fits all look at history. But of course, it's not just here. It's very much happening in America as well, and certainly in other European countries. There is, I think, a general sweep of thought that wants to turn everything about. And honestly, I do think that it's encouraging self-hatred. I think it's encouraging hatred, white people hating white people, and it's also sowing some confusion as well. I mean, the other issue here is that with, history is a huge subject. You could say, why haven't we done Uzbekistan over the last 2,000 years? Why haven't we looked at that? Why haven't we looked at the last 2,000 years of Rwanda? You have to pick and choose in some sense, somewhere with history. And, as he said, you need to start with your own culture and your own approach as well, your own culture's approach.
Professor, if I can go back to you for just finally, before I have to let you go, does this move have the broad support of academics or not?
Well, I think most academics are politically on the left, so I suppose it does. I mean, I'm afraid I'm a conservative, so I'm not going to be sympathetic. But can I just reply to Emma? It is not the case that you're juxtaposing some Britannia rules the waves against some modern group who want to widen it. History, as taught for several decades, has actually been quite wide and offering a lot of difference of opinion. What is a classic case is people who want change always stigmatise what has happened before. And all I'm saying is that's not wise and that's not sensible, either in terms of the content of British history or in terms of how it is presented. We are obviously a democracy, which is a good thing. There should be a diversity of views. And in a way, the problem with decolonisation, so-called, is it actually seeks to prejudge all the debate that you might encourage students, school children, anybody else to have, which is a debate in which you can have, as I tried to say, you can have views that are both positive and negative about empire and particular imperial experiences. What is wrong is simply to say this was a negative part of our history and we should all try these people, as it were, in retrospect and say how bad they were. That, I'm afraid to say, is childish and naive, and it is not helpful in a society in which we're trying to encourage debate.
Powerful and useful insights there from Professor Black. Thank you for joining us this evening, Professor Jeremy Black, Emeritus Professor of History at the University of Exeter. Have to move on though. After the break, I'll be speaking to the Reverend William Phillip of the Tron Church in Glasgow about the meaning of Easter in the modern world.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, but to the point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. Easter is the principal festival of the Christian Church, celebrating as it does the return to life of Jesus Christ on the third day after his crucifixion. In a world turned upside down by 2 years of lockdowns and attendant disruption, followed by a cost of living crisis and war in Ukraine, the promise of hope, which is what the Easter festival might be said to be all about, could hardly be more welcome. Joining me now to pause for thought and to remember why Easter has mattered to billions of people all around the world for the best part of 2,000 years is the Reverend William Philip, Senior Minister of the Tron Church in Glasgow. Hello, Reverend William.
Good evening, Neil.
Good to see you again. I'll get right into it. What does Easter mean to you, William the man, and as well as William the Reverend?
Well, I suppose the most important thing is it doesn't really matter so much what Easter means to me or to anybody else. What matters is what Easter is really about, and it's Jesus Christ himself who tells us that. We've been studying this year in our services running up to Easter from John's Gospel, chapter 12, and that's the end of Jesus' public ministry, just before he's about to go to the cross. And he says at that point, "Father, glorify your name. Now is the time for the Son of Man to be glorified." And so what Jesus says is that above all things, Easter and the cross of Christ brings us a revelation, a great revelation, the revelation of the meaning of true glory in this world. It's interesting, you've been talking about presidents, about empires, and all of these things. Well, Jesus says the cross is where we see ultimate glory, divine glory. He prays in the upper room, "Father, glorify me with the glory I had with you before the world existed." And that's what we see in the death and resurrection of Jesus, the eternal glory of the triune God. That was the glory Jesus shared with the Father before all worlds. And that means that the glory at the very heart of the universe, the glory at the very heart of God, divine glory, is what we see unveiled uniquely and fully in the cross. And that is a staggering thing. That's a challenging thing, isn't it, when we're living in a world of wars, of ascendancy, of one nation over another, empires, all of these things. The glory that comes from man is a very, very different thing than the glory that comes from God. And the cross reveals to us true glory.
It's a very powerful message that you offer there, William, and one I'm sure will be very gratefully received by many, many people watching, listening to this. But with so much, as you mentioned, so many practical challenges for people to face, cost of living crisis, concerns about war and the spread thereof, why should we set time aside for a celebration of Easter? When people have so much that's imminent and in their faces and in their lives to deal with, why should they set aside time?
Because there's a desperate need, isn't there, in the human heart and in our human society for hope. And as we look around at our world, there is very little hope in humanity. We look to leaders of nations. You've just been talking about that. Where is the hope there? Hope that disappoints. There's promises from governments. But what do we find there? Well, these promises are so often hollow. The hope that we have in Easter is that through the resurrection of Jesus Christ, there is a rebirth of true humanity. And what we see in the risen Jesus Christ is human beings as we were created to be and as we've been redeemed to be through Jesus Christ. There's great hope in the face of death. What you see in the risen Jesus is the future of humanity. The future of humanity doesn't come to us through technology. It doesn't come through transhumanism. It doesn't come through progress or spreading democracy around the world. How's that working out? The end of history was declared, wasn't it, about 20 years ago, 30 years ago, with the end of communism, a utopia. Things can never get any better than they are. Well, how's that working out? The cross of Jesus and the resurrection of Jesus says there is more. There is hope. There is a new world. Christ is risen and Christ is returning. And when he returns, those who are his will be raised to new life, eternal, like his bodily life, not some wispy, ethereal sort of floating around in the ether, but the solidity of resurrection bodies. Jesus ate. Jesus met with people. Jesus, the risen Christ, was more real as a human being than ever before, more solid. The shadowlands are put away. C.S. Lewis used that wonderful phrase that these are just the shadowlands, but he shows us the real lands, the real future, the real hope. And that is the hope of the Christian gospel, not in a hope that comes from man, but in a hope that has come to us from God through the cross of Jesus Christ. And it's an extraordinary hope, and it's a wonderful hope. It's the only hope. And to me, it animates my whole life. That's what it means to be a Christian, to live in hope, to know the reality that is coming.
It's a fascinating paradox that you point to there when you say that, by so many metrics, there's never been a better time to be alive. More food has been available. More medical advances have been shared widely. Technology, the good side of technology, has enabled all manner of things, and yet happiness and hope simultaneously and paradoxically seem to be harder and harder to find. You're right that we're losing something else in amongst all the man-made gifts that we've created for ourselves.
I think we are, but look, at the end of the day, what really matters is that every one of us is going to return to dust. It doesn't matter how charmed our life is. It doesn't matter how long we can be made to live through technology, through modern medicine. And, we should be very thankful for any of these things. But the fact is, Neil, you and I are going to return to dust. And what happens then? And the reality of the Christian hope is that we have a hope of resurrection, of life eternal, of life that is at last removed from all of these tragedies of death and sin. The problem in this world is the human heart. The problem is the sin in the human heart. And we can look around at the world, and we're very good at seeing evil out there. In fact, in the current circumstances, people are very quick, aren't they, to demonize the other from whatever camp they happen to be in. The problem is that the evil is inside. It's in our hearts, in yours and mine. And until that's dealt with, there is no hope. But Jesus Christ came to deal with that problem, the problem of sin and evil. And so that's why at the end of his public ministry, he cried out to people and said, walk in the light while you have the light, because that's what I've come to bring, salvation, not judgment, but there will be a judgment. And the question is, where will we stand on that day? And that's the joy of Easter. It's a message of life through judgment.
William, it's this weekend of all weekends, and it's the ethos of the channel to hear as many voices as possible. And what you've had to say is, we don't hear enough of, and I'm delighted that you've brought these words to us this evening. I'm sure it'll have brought a great deal of hope and reassurance and comfort to many people. So, Reverend William Phillip, Senior Minister of the Tron Church in Glasgow, thanks for now, and I'll look forward to the next time our paths cross. After the break, we'll meet tonight's Great Britain, Michael Olive, and I'm not sure how he has the time, because as I speak, he's in the middle of running 215 miles in 10 days in aid of the Epilepsy Society. Let's see how his breathing's doing.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you, or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. This is the section of the show I look forward to at least as much as any other. It's the Great Britain, where we find someone who's set personal adversity or challenge aside to do something for the good of the wider community. Mike Olaf from Pickering in Yorkshire is subjecting himself to a gruelling challenge. Right now, as I speak, he's catching his breath during a 215-mile run across the Cleveland Way, the Yorkshire Wolds Way, and the last leg of the Trans-Pennine Trail. That sounds ridiculous and undoable, but anyway, all of that sounds like a colossal effort for any runner. But Mike's challenge is intensified by the fact he was diagnosed with epilepsy in 2020. He suffered a seizure during his preparations for the event just last month, which interrupted his training. All money raised by his sponsored run will go to the Epilepsy Society, and Mike joins me now. Mike, there you are.
Hello.
You're up and you're still up and at 'em. It's good to see. How's it going?
Yeah, all right. It's not too bad, to be honest. I thought at some point today it was pretty dark place. It was much harder after about 10 miles. But then it seemed to get a bit more flat, and yeah, just got through it.
Where do we find you? When did you start? How far have you run? How far have you got to go?
So I started yesterday. I started in Helmsley and went to Osmotherley, and that was approximately 20 miles. And then I started from Osmotherley and finished just near Stokesley today. So that was about 23 miles. So I've done about 43 in total.
Right, so there's still quite a road stretched out before you. Were you a runner before you had your diagnosis of epilepsy?
Yeah, I've always kind of been a plodder, really, not so much running. I didn't do so much once I'd been diagnosed, and was just starting to. And then my friend invited me to a WhatsApp group, middle-aged runners, and yeah, it's just a kind of little good community, and we all kind of egg each other on and encourage each other. A little bit of competitiveness, and then start to get back into it. And then I thought, right, let's do something stupid. Let's raise a bit of money for a great cause.
Not stupid, not stupid. How I have to ask about the epilepsy. Are you having to make special provision around that? Do you have backup and people ready to provide support for you?
Yeah, so I've got a one-person support team. My suffering partner Tracy. She keeps an eye on me. We have regular kind of pit stops. It's the fluids more than anything, just making sure that I'm kind of topped up with water and kind of energy drinks. She's done a fair bit of baking, so lots of sugary snack. I'll probably have put on weight by the time I finished.
So it's just the two of you. I was imagining, you know, a Winnebago running, you know, coming behind you with endless supplies with energy drinks.
No, so it's just me doing the actual run. But yeah, my partner, we've kind of plotted out the route, and when there's kind of a road crosses with the trail, that's where she's meeting me to get kind of topped up, and then I'll go and do the next X amount of miles.
Amazing, and I have to say, and I listed the route in shorthand there. Must be some spectacular scenery that you've either been through already or that you have to look forward to.
Yeah, it has been amazing, and when you're not thinking about kind of how much more you've got to go and things like that, you do kind of, it does take your breath away really, and you think, how lucky am I to live in such a great place. So yeah, no, it's been fantastic. I'm looking forward to kind of literally what's round the corner.
And have you personal reasons to be, thankful to the Epilepsy Society? Are you connected to them on account of your diagnosis?
Yeah, so they've been really good with advice more than anything. I've had a terrible time with the DVLA. If you ever do a special on the DVLA, let me know. Well, I'll use that for a full hour. So they've been really good with the advice and things for that. And it's just sometimes you just need someone to talk to who understands the situation you're in, and it can be really good for that as well.
How much of an impact has it had on your day-to-day life? You know, never mind contemplating a physical challenge like this one.
It takes away your independence, really. That's the main thing. So I'm now having to rely a lot on kind of public transport, and my partner drives me everywhere. My child lives, it's an hour's drive. So when I see her at a weekend, we've got to drive. It's a 2-hour round trip with Tracy's little girl as well. So it's that kind of thing, really. It's then you're having to rely on other people. If it was just me, you just get on with it. But it's the further impact it has on other people as well.
And when it comes to the running, what is the greatest distance that you've previously completed? Have you a marathon under your belt or anything of that order?
Yeah, I've done a marathon, and I did the Edinburgh Ultra, October. I can't remember. It was pre-epilepsy.
I'll just involve my guests here in the studio. I can hear the supportive noises that are coming from Emma and Jasmine. Emma, it's a lift for all of us, isn't it?
Absolutely.
As if a 250-mile run wasn't challenge enough, to do it, when epilepsy has become part of life.
Absolutely. It's so inspiring. As I said to you in the break, I couldn't run 215 metres in 10 days. I can't run for a bus. I'm sticking to yoga, Mike. I'm sorry, but I think you're fantastic.
Yeah. And Jasmine, they always reset the clock for me when I hear these stories, because all my preoccupations and concerns, I think, but I'm not having to cope with that.
Absolutely.
Set of circumstances.
Yes, and as Emma says, it is inspiring, because I'm always more interested, if I'm honest, the disabled Olympics, the Special Olympics, because you've got the mental overcoming as well as the physical overcoming. So it's a great thing to see that you really can, with whatever you're dealing with, you can overcome it and do even greater things than you might have thought before.
Yeah, Mike, I hope you're hearing those sounds, those votes of support.
Yeah.
I have to admit, when you were talking there about epilepsy, it's not clear to me, or hasn't been clear to me, exactly what an impact epilepsy has on a person. That's my ignorance there, and I do think it's important to be reminded
that. That's the thing I'm trying to do, really, is to get that awareness out. to people as well, because a lot of people are in the same boat. They don't understand what someone with epilepsy kind of goes through and has to think about on a day-to-day basis. I mean, yeah, I have to take a couple of tablets a day. But yeah, like everything kind of I listed before, that's the other impact. And people will be in a much worse position than me as well. I'm lucky I've got a really supportive partner and a really supportive family. So there will be people in a worse position than me.
I'd like, obviously, to give you an opportunity to do things practical. There'll be a lot of people watching and listening that would like to support, like to offer up some cash. What are the ways in which they might help you and back your campaign?
So yeah, a couple of different ways. I'm being vastly underprepared and not written down my Just Giving page. So it's on Just Giving. And if you were to just Google my name, so it's Michael Olith, and you can follow me on Twitter. I'm quite I like to kind of keep people updated on Twitter as well, which is at MikeyMoo80.
And I'm wondering, I have to ask really, how much money do you think you might be able to raise? Because I know that you're going to complete the run, so that's a done deal as far as I'm concerned. So what's your target?
I've already reached my target was £1,000. I've already reached that target, but any more from anybody is brilliant, whether it be 5, 10p or 5, £10, just whatever people want to give, or just supportive words on Twitter is really nice as well. Just kind of keeps you going.
Mike, once again, as so many of as in fact all of the individuals who've come on here under the banner of Great Britain, you're an inspiration. I hope you, not just me saying that, but Jasmine and Emma sitting alongside me, we're all nodding along with you, and just your story lifts us up and reminds us that there are so many other things to be concerned about than just ourselves. So all the best, and I'll look forward to hearing that you've crossed that finishing line. Thanks, Mike.
Thanks ever so much.
You're watching Neil Oliver Live. I'm here until 9 o'clock. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. We are... My mistake there, misjudged the arrival of the Sting, not for the first time in my life. You're watching GB News and I'm Neil Oliver. Coming up this hour, I'll be discussing diversity and inclusion with Lord Taylor of Warwick, the only black lord out of nearly 1800 when he was made a peer in 1996. Food supply issues could become a major talking point due to supply chain disruptions and the war in Ukraine. I'll be in conversation with countryside commentator Edward Dawson, and we'll also be discussing concerns over lower exam grades for deaf children with Mike Hobday of the National Deaf Children's Society. All of that to come, and the UK's oldest gorilla, but first, here are the latest news headlines.
Good evening, I'm Miranda Shunker in the GB newsroom. First tonight, Russia has banned the UK Prime Minister, Foreign Secretary, Defence Secretary and Scotland's First Minister from entering the country. The Foreign Ministry announced Boris Johnson, Liz Truss, Ben Wallace and Nicola Sturgeon are all barred from now, along with 9 other government members and politicians. Moscow says unprecedented hostile action by the British government is the reason behind the move. Meanwhile, Russia has released a video claiming to show the head of its navy meeting the entire crew of the sunken warship Moskva. Moscow claims all 500 crew were rescued when the vessel sank in the Black Sea and that they will continue to serve in the navy. Admiral Nikolai Yevmenov is seen inspecting and speaking to the servicemen, but it isn't clear when the footage was taken. The US has suggested there were Russian casualties after 2 Ukrainian missiles hit the warship on Thursday. Officials in Ukraine say over 1,400 people were evacuated through humanitarian corridors today as explosions continued on the outskirts of the capital Kiev and in the cities of Lviv and Kharkiv. President Zelensky has been presenting soldiers with medals at a ceremony, but says around 3,000 of his troops have been killed since the beginning of Russia's invasion. In a phone call, Volodymyr Zelensky updated Boris Johnson on the situation on the ground this afternoon. Officials say Russia's navy continues to block the port in the besieged city of Mariupol. In other news, more than 6,000 migrants have crossed the Channel to British shores so far this year. Over 3,000 came in March alone, 4 times more than the number recorded in the same month last year. The Navy took over operational command of handling those attempting the journey on Thursday as part of the planned transfer of asylum seekers to Rwanda. It's as the Home Secretary claims other countries could now copy the UK's proposals, despite the UN Refugee Agency branding them illegal. 6 protesters have been arrested after climate change activists targeted an oil tanker in central London. Extinction Rebellion say a number of people, including Olympic gold medalist Etienne Stott and fellow British Olympian Laura Baldwin, climbed onto the Shell tanker this morning. Anti-far-right protests have turned violent in Paris. Police have fired tear gas at demonstrators against presidential candidate Marine Le Pen in the Place de la République. The election campaign is entering its final week between Le Pen and the current incumbent, Emmanuel Macron. Well, on TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Now it's back to Neil.
Now, when my next guest was made a peer in 1996, he was the only black lord out of nearly 1,800. On his first day in the House of Lords, an elderly Viscount took him for a waiter and asked for a gin and tonic. Subsequently, he has spoken at the White House, the UN and the World Trade Organization. Throughout a long career, he has spoken about diversity and inclusion, and he continues to challenge boardrooms to become more diverse. He's described the move towards racial equality as a marathon and not a sprint. By his own testimony, he remains optimistic about the future. Lord Taylor of Warwick joins me now. Good evening and thank you for joining us.
Hello, Neil. It's good to be here.
Lovely to see you there. Obviously, the race debate has grown especially febrile, hot-tempered in the last couple of years. Has that injection of heat hindered or helped progress towards the longed-for equality?
Neil, I think it has. I mean, there's more heat than light, unfortunately. Let's start at the beginning. There's only one race, the human race. We should all be equal. We're not. But rather than being bitter, let's get better. Let's learn from the past. I'm actually very positive. You know, I'd rather be black in Britain than Russia or Iraq or other parts of the world. Let's be positive. The glass is half full. There are lots of problems, but let's be positive. It's faith, not fear.
You've mentioned that other protests, anti-racism protests in recent months and years have been the work of and have attracted those whose objectives you don't agree with and that you don't think have helped. Could you elaborate on that?
For example, defunding the police. That's balmy. Black Lives Matter has become a business. The people that started BLM have just bought a mansion in America for $6.5 million. Now, they need to explain why they've done that.
You see optimism, which I'm always delighted to hear about. Optimism for any reason in any.
I support Aston Villa. I have to be optimistic. Otherwise,
But you've been involved in politics since the 80s anyway, and in
the 1880s. I know. I'm old. Thank you.
Through the 90s, does your optimism come from? Do you continue to see things getting better to such an extent that what's happening now? Do you see that more as a blip that we can get beyond?
Well, my mother told me, John, being black is not a profession, so you need to get skills and education. We all have problems in life, whether you're black, white, disabled, female, male. People watching this show have their own problems. You have to look at them as this. Is it a speed bump or a roadblock? And it's a way of getting around this. I believe we're living in a fantastic country. There have been bad things in the past. I mean, my great-great-grandfather was a slave on the Taylor plantation. That's why I'm called John Taylor. I could be bitter about it, or let's get better. So my attitude is, let's look forward to the future. This is a great country, multiracial, multicultural. Yeah, there are problems. We'll get around them.
We were talking with I don't know if you had the opportunity to hear it, we had a previous guest talking about decolonising the history curriculum. And there's been a lot of high-profile cases of, the removal of statues, other cultural figures being targeted as for one reason and another. How do you feel watching that? And does any of it have your backing?
Well, I spoke about this at Oxford University a few months ago. I'd rather make history than delete it. We know there are problems in the past, slavery and so forth. But rather than take down the statues, leave them up there and explain that that person was a slave trader. If you take down the statue, it means that my grandchildren won't even know about that slave trader. So, don't delete, explain and move on. There's also some hypocrisy, I'm afraid. There's more modern slavery than Victorian slavery in the fashion industry, in the third world, making our garments that appear in the, fashion stores. But we don't talk about that. We talk about some dead Victorian who can't answer for himself.
That element does mystify me, because the appetite to seek almost to punish people who in most cases died comfortably tucked up in their beds a couple of hundred years ago seems unbelievably pointless and futile. When, as you say, there are iniquities and appalling abuses.
And by the way, there were also black slave traders. We don't like to talk about that.
Yes.
Hypocrisy.
If I can invite you to consider, the wider topics. Clearly, a very hot.
Not Aston Villa, please. Let's move on from that.
I can only tell you that I know nothing about football.
You're on the wrong side.
I'm absolved. I'm absolved.
I'm just very sensitive. Yeah.
I can understand all of that. When it comes to the numbers of cross-channel immigration is a very hot topic at the moment. What's your response to, we're seeing these record numbers being reported, and it's probably not even the totality of the numbers that are actually on the move. Now there's talk of offshoring people to Rwanda to process, and yet at the same time there are the Ukrainian refugees fleeing a bona fide war zone, also needing to be and seeking to be accommodated. How do you, when you look on at that movement of people, all of them needing or wanting to come to this part of the world, what do you say?
Well, it is an issue. It's a question of how you fix it. With Rwanda, I'm just concerned, Neil, that it's politics pushing policy. We've got the local elections coming up in a few days' time.
The timing.
Yeah, the timing, and it detracts from Partygate and so forth. But will it be effective? Something needs to be done. Let's be frank about that. But will it be effective? Australia tried it, Israel tried it, Denmark has tried it. Very expensive, and it hasn't worked. So, somebody said that it'd be cheaper to put someone up in the Ritz than do what they're doing. So to offshore the problem, I'm not convinced is the right, but I do agree we have to find a solution.
Do you think that hiding out there in plain sight or not is a solution that is not draconian? There's one draconian thing or another that could be done that no doubt would stop the movement of people crossing the channel. But short of that, is there an elusive, peaceful, amicable solution to what is clearly a problem that will not stop and will not
I believe there is.
And what is it?
We have embassies all around the world. The people concerned who are desperate should go to those British embassies and apply for asylum there, in Iraq, in Syria. And if they succeed, then they come across. That's what should be done. I don't know why they don't do it. And the government should be doing this. Otherwise, people are going to continue. You think they're going to stop? They're desperate.
This is the issue. I cannot help but think that there are only going to be more and more people on the move.
Absolutely.
Full stop.
I mean, this only affects single men, so there'll be women and children coming across in the dinghies. disaster.
Yeah, I think on the planet as a whole, I think it's something like 1 billion people out of 7 billion people are on the move.
Yeah.
Within their own country or from one country to another.
Yeah. You had a pastor on in the last segment. I think it's Matthew 5, verse 9. Blessed are the peacemakers. And that's what we should be doing, making peace. What we're doing is firefighting. We should be, talking to people, talking to the Russians before the war starts.
And it is.
You see, we bomb these places and are surprised when they want to come here. We bomb them. That's the result of war.
A defining characteristic of what you have been about is diversity and inclusion.
Yeah.
Is that the solution? Is that also part of the solution to I don't know, fomenting understanding or fostering understanding of other people,
Yeah, no, I agree. And fear of the other is the element of racism, really. It's not just about black faces in high places, but that helps. If you look at in Britain, I mean, you take football, which I've mentioned 100 times already. There's no black or Asian at the top of the FA, the Premier League. Look at cricket. My father played cricket. There's no one at the top of the ECB. And so as a child growing up, I grew up in Paradise, Birmingham, off the M6 motorway. When you look at the TV in the 1950s and you don't see any other black people, you don't feel that you're part of the community. And so, yes, you're right. It's my first day in the House of Lords. I was in the Cholmondeley room, standing there. An old elderly Viscount comes up to me, could you get me a gin and tonic, old boy? And so I got the gin and tonic, and I came across, gave it to him. He said, thank you, good man. Another peer came over, Lord Taylor, are you settling in? And the Viscount, I thought he was going to have a heart attack. I thought it's my first day in the House of Lords and I've killed somebody. So, and he said, but why did you get me the gin and tonic? I said, well, you asked me to.
So the error of his ways was revealed unto him.
Absolutely. But you see, I could have reacted in anger.
Absolutely.
What would that have achieved?
Yeah, I'm glad you got him the drink.
Oh, I've got absolutely.
I would have done.
I mean, this is the thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's about campaigning in the right way.
Yes.
And this is something I talk about so often, when, as you said at the start, I'm a political consultant, amongst too many other hats. But change is made when you can find a space of agreement and broaden it.
Exactly.
It's not made when you just go to your corners.
It's not a boxing match. Yeah. It's a journey, not a destination.
What do you think of I think we can all acknowledge that the movement of people across the Channel is a disruption that's disrupting life for a lot of people, not just the people who are on the move. What do you think to the latest proposal, this offshoring of
I completely agree with what Lord Taylor said, in that it feels ill thought through, rushed, very expensive, and it just feels to me like it's... I get quite cross at people who claim just about everything that Boris Johnson does is a dead cat strategy. It's one of those phrases that we've picked up on and don't really understand. On the other hand, if it looks like a dead cat, smells like a dead cat, and doesn't meow, I think that is what we've got on the table here. I'm not even sure this is actually going to really happen in any sort of proper way, because it's basically unworkable.
Listening to that proposed policy, or I think it's been signed off now, hasn't it, Jasmine? Do you think a single person will board a plane and arrive in Rwanda as a result of this? Or?
That is the question always, isn't it? The government often makes these great pronouncements, and then when it comes down to it, the paperwork, the actual physical reality of it is quite a different thing. So, who knows? Honestly, who knows? Clearly, there needs to be some sort of deterrent. There needs to be something done because, we've seen the figures. They are extraordinary. But it must be, as we've talked about, joined up government or lack of. There needs to be a joined up approach from a multi-country point of view. We've got to be together with France on this for a start.
I used to be at the Home Office. I was a special advisor. You need to work with the civil servants, and they've already said they're not happy about this, and that's a bad sign.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's face it, the Home Office is hardly the department you would give a really, really complex big project to run.
It's too big, Neil. It really is.
But also, I think, rather than just saying, how do we deter people from coming, how do we make it really awful and hard and rotten and these are people for whom awful, hard and rotten is a daily reality. It's very hard to make things worse than they are for them. Actually, something that you were saying earlier, Lord Taylor, is, how can we intervene to make their lives better elsewhere?
Invest.
And actually, that is the best way of thinking about this for us.
We make war, we bomb them, and then they want to come here. And we say no.
Now, you're an Aston Villa supporter, and you've told me that necessitates a certain level of optimism. So I want to end this on an optimistic note. Give us another sense of why you remain optimistic that this whole issue of seeking to become one human race is a marathon that can be won.
Because I'm a Christian, I've got a Christian faith, and I think we live in an amazing world that God created. And if you look at history, it's always moving forwards, never backwards. We have problems, but the trend is forwards. That's why I'm optimistic.
I'll take that.
Not because I'm an Aston Villa supporter. I'm defiant. How dare you impugn my...
It's good. No, it's good to hear hope and optimism at Easter time.
Exactly.
So
thank
you. Many thanks for coming in and sharing, above all else, your optimism with us. Great to see you. Now, after the break, is the issue of food supply about to become a huge problem? Countryside campaigner and commentator Edward Dawson will be here with us to discuss it.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back to Neil Oliver Live. Thanks for staying with me. A cost of living crisis is upon us. 2 years of lockdowns here and around the world that disrupted the production of essentials and also the supply. Net zero policies have exposed our dependence on other people's energy. Now there's war in Europe, a further factor sure to take its toll on many aspects of our economy and way of life. It's all adding up, and right at the top of most people's priorities is food, both its price and its availability. Here to consider some of the challenges is Edward Dawson, countryside campaigner and commentator. Good evening, Edward. Thanks for joining us.
Very good to be with you, Neil.
Good to see you. First of all, we've largely, I would say, taken food supply for granted in Britain. You know, most of us have grown up, been able to, where money's available to go to the supermarket and have whatever we want. What is the scale of the potential problem that you envisage?
Okay, well, can I start off by saying that we have done very well in terms of food supply over the past century or so. there's been a progressive increase. And let me give you a couple of examples. If you look at things like various metrics, calorie supply, for example, that may be about 3,000 per person per day. Fit chap like you, Neil, might only need 2,000, but some countries have a lot more than that. North America, for example, 3,000 to 4,000, and maybe 2,000 or less in parts of Africa. It's a kind of standard metric, really, of availability, of what I call food security. And in a sense, you could say that we are more equal today than we've ever been in terms of food supply around the world. It's not really the regions that are the problems. The issues of inequalities lie within countries rather than at the wider level. Let me give you another example. Protein supply by region. Again, it's a fairly standard measure of food supply over time, and you might need 100 grams per day per person. Well, if you look at that, then very important to have those proteins. In some countries, there's 115 perhaps. North America, again, an example. Other places, Africa, maybe 70 or below grams per day. And when I say availability, I mean it's there. It doesn't mean that it's being consumed or used, because there are a lot of other factors. Waste in production, manufacture, processing. There can be all sorts of losses in use, losses in restaurants, in households. So it's there, but we have to look at how it works at the individual level. I suppose you could say that global distribution differences are also narrowing. So the story basically is a good one, the background. There may be lots of reasons why these issues are there, maybe cultural, historic, why there are these differences within countries, political, different priorities and so on. So these are some of the reasons why. But as you introduced me as a countryside campaigner, I've been concerned about protecting the countryside from development for a long time, and through organisations like CPRE that I've worked for, but also protecting land from development, for example, to make sure it's there for lots of reasons. And there's often been a bit of a conflict with farmers who produce, people who protect countryside and farmers. There's been a difference of view there. So I think now, perhaps, as you were saying in your introduction, we need to look at things from a consumer perspective, prices, as you say, and I can go on to that.
We've grown very accustomed to cheap food, haven't we?
Yes.
And it's a bit of a conundrum, that, isn't it? Because it might be cheap for the people buying it, but that must and does have consequences for the people growing and producing it. So I would say that you might say there's no such thing as cheap food. It just depends what end of the equation you're on.
Absolutely. No, you're absolutely right. I like to look at it like a tricorn hat, a sort of triangle with access, prices and quality. And price is something we've always looked at and been very careful about. But I think people have become more aware of quality of food, seasonality, availability, that kind of thing. Even ethical views about it have come through. But you're quite right that cheapness to the consumer may be a bit of a fallacy. I would say that food needs to be paid for. Wherever it is, you can't simply have food freely handed out, because there's a loss to the producers, the growers. They do need an income to make sure that they are growing more, investing, and all the rest of it. So you're quite right. It's a bit of a fallacy, but we've had it, and in America as well, cheap food policies for a long time.
What changes do you see coming? If you began by painting a picture saying that we had done well, that we had reduced the inequalities, that we had generally made food more available to more people than ever before. But clearly, with the past couple of years, disrupted supply chains, now war in Ukraine and all the rest of it, what changes and what strictures do you see coming?
Well, as you say, all these factors have come along. We've had the pandemic and the outflows from that, war now. I think in many ways, the war in Ukraine has turned a lot of our assumptions on our head, really. We need to look at this from a basic point of view. What do we need in terms of food supply, food security? I think food security is a bit of a fallacy in a sense. It's a concept rather than something that really applies. And what do we want to achieve? Do we want to avoid poverty? But there are problems of obesity as well. There are a lot of factors that seem to work against each other in food policy, and we have lots of advisors, United Nations obviously, as well as our own government and agencies and so on. We need to look at how the market functions, make sure the market does paying for food, making sure the market does work well so that food availability is there. And we have to respond to public perceptions as well.
After all these years of just-in-time deliveries and taking for granted the arrival of whatever kiwi fruits and quinoa from here, there, and everywhere, should we and could we be making more, growing more, producing more of the food that people could and should be living on here?
That's a conundrum in itself as well, I'm afraid. All these things are, because if you produce more of your own food, you may be advocating a sort of self-sufficiency state, which means we don't have world trade, perhaps, which we've run used to as well. And self-sufficiency, sustainability can all too easily lead to poverty, really, in themselves, poverty. And that's my concern, that if food is traded across the world, it's very important that we continue to do that, not just look at cheap food, but make sure that we're meeting people's aspirations, educate people as to where food comes from. As you said, we've taken things for granted for a long time, a bit like energy policy as well. Why do we need, as ordinary consumers, to worry about these things? Aren't they really for governments and agencies and so on to think about? We've got other things more important to do in our own lives. But actually, we do need to be aware of them, to think about them, and to be responsible consumers in a sense. There's also quite a lot of fads and fantasies about food that emerge, and we've got to be careful we're not just feeding into those. Food is a basic thing. We all need it, but we've got to make sure that it's sourced sustainably. Perhaps we need to apply that word sustainability in a slightly different way, and to make sure we know what it means in this context.
And finally, while I have you here, I see on social media even reference being made by many people to the lump sum exit scheme, whereby the government is offering to help people out of farming, by buying up their land and whatever. Is that not a bizarre option at a time when it would seem, we barely produce half of the food that we need here? Why now of all times would the government be encouraging or incentivising people to get out, when I would have thought you want more people to come into the industry to grow more food?
I think it's supposed to be a kind of tidying up exercise where there are people who may want to leave, perhaps they're tenant farmers, something like that. It wasn't so long ago before the government was saying that we should be looking at or being concerned about farmers retiring early and not having a successor, family farms falling out of use because the successors, the children, don't want to take it up. They want a different job. They want to go and work in a city or something like that. And therefore, we were losing the experience and of family farms and farmers and so on. So now I agree. We have this lump sum opt-out scheme. I hope it's just a sort of a modest tidying up, because we do need people in the industry, and we do need people to grow food. Absolutely, in this country and abroad, there's no doubt about that, and I think that's got to be at the forefront of government's mind.
Edward Dawson, Countryside campaigner, it's so important, I think, that we turn a light and keep a light on food production in this country, because what can we do if we can't feed ourselves? Thank you for your time this evening.
Indeed, indeed.
Now, to change the subject just a little, deaf pupils have achieved lower exam grades than hearing pupils for perhaps the last 6 years in a row. According to the National Deaf Children's Society, the average score at GCSE in 2020 was grade 4 compared to grade 5 for hearing children. Now, since deafness is not a learning disability, there ought to be no reason why deaf children should achieve less. Joining me now to shed light on the plight of deaf children is Mike Hobday. Executive Director of Policy and Campaigns for the National Deaf Children's Society. Welcome, Mike.
Thank you.
Thank you for being with us. First of all, can I ask, how many deaf children or hearing impaired children are there in the education system?
So at any given point, there's around 35,000 deaf children, sitting there in schools, striving for a good education. And, sadly, as the figures you've indicated, not getting it.
And why? What's the key or collection of reasons why deaf children, hearing impaired children, are not being able to make the best of themselves?
I mean, it is a collection of reasons, of course. If there was a simple answer, we'd have done it. We'd have done it long ago. But there are things that we can do, to make the system work better. So I'm a hearing person myself. I'm not deaf, and I haven't sat through the COVID period trying to sort of, listen to a teacher and lip read them through a face mask. I haven't been told to learn from videos that are without captions, so you can't tell, what's being said. We have forgotten over the past couple of years some of the basics about how to give a good education, to deaf children, and now absolutely it's long overdue to get it right.
What's the main thing that's missing from? Is the system just broken, or is it simply the case that there aren't enough, learning support people in classrooms who can sign? Is it as simple as that?
There's a couple of things we could do that would make life a lot better and would enable deaf children, to reach their potential and to go on, to have, more fulfilling careers. So firstly, we ought to give every teacher who starts, some basic deaf awareness, the core skills in how to teach, a deaf pupil. And then secondly, there are specialist roles. There are people called teachers of the deaf, who provide advice to schools, advice to teachers, who support deaf children with the greatest level of need. Numbers of teachers of deaf have sadly been falling steadily over the last 10 years. We've got to do something about that and get the numbers up. Because if deaf children are surrounded by teachers who know how to teach them, they'll flourish and thrive, the same as their hearing friends.
It's a tragic sadness, isn't it? To bear in mind that, as I said in the introduction, that deafness is not a learning disability, and those children should be doing every bit as well as those alongside them who can hear. And the thought that they're being held back and not reaching potential for want of that kind of support is just harrowing. And I read when I was reading around this in advance of speaking to you this evening that signing is the 4th most used language in Britain. Isn't that's extraordinary? I mean, that's a large proportion of people who are communicating one to another in that way, and yet they're being overlooked.
And wouldn't it be fantastic if more people could sign? I mean, I'm learning myself, but just at this stage at a very basic level. But we want deaf young people. We want deaf people to be fully included in our society.
Well, yes.
We want them to have every opportunity that their hearing friends get. So let's put them in an environment where we know how to talk with them, and where their teachers can engage with them effectively.
And something else I thought about, again, I'm always confronted by things doing this, where I'm thinking about things for the first time. And I thought, if your child, when your child is, a baby and then becoming a toddler, and one of the great joys is as they begin to speak and you start communicating and telling, hearing stories and all the rest of it, what is the process by which two hearing parents or a hearing parent with a deaf child, how do they go about learning to communicate with their child and also teaching that toddler to communicate with them? What's the process?
So it's a really important question you ask, because overwhelmingly 90% of deaf children are born to hearing parents. They're born to people for whom deafness is an entirely new experience. And what we know is that a deaf baby or toddler will thrive if they're brought up in a rich language and communications environment. So that they may have a little bit of hearing, you know, they may be able to gesticulate, to indicate their preferences. I mean, I've got grandchildren, and you know very quickly what they're happy about and what they don't. And the important thing is for families to be supported, to have lots of communication with their deaf child, and that puts the children right on the start, you know, even before they start to go to school.
Jasmine, it's fascinating and troubling to hear this, isn't it? The fourth most used language in Britain is signing.
And
I'm sure
for one. I've tried learning it as well.
Have you? And why did you seek to learn?
I mean, I'm just interested in languages, to be frank, you know, and communication, but also because I had a couple of deaf friends, and I was just quite interested in doing it. I can do the deaf alphabet.
Yeah, me too.
Yes, that one. That's not so difficult. But the actual signing it's a whole new way of thinking, you know, rather than being verbal.
Emma, it's such an overlooked situation, isn't it? And I mean, because you know, deafness is associated with, you know, being cut off and silence. It almost feels as though it comes with the territory. But you know, how do you respond to hearing that children who should cognitively be doing just as well, if not, that their intelligence should determine how well they do at school, not their hearing or the lack of it. How do you feel about that trouble?
Mean, we owe deaf children as good an education as we owe any other child.
Oh.
And that obviously means they have to have a different education, but not a separate education. And I just think I'm fascinated that households that communicate loads anyway, and now I'm gesticulating wildly, which I do naturally, are the ones that are likely to actually do better in this. And I think that's a really, really important principle. I think if you have a deaf child in a classroom, the emphasis should be on everyone to communicate with them rather than on their communication with everybody else, if you see what I mean. I'd rather see it as a group thing, something that everybody can learn and grow from. And wouldn't it be wonderful if these deaf children in a classroom give everybody this new skill of just some basics in sign language?
I mean, what I realised listening to you and what I realised this morning reading about it, I wasn't good at languages. I don't seem to have that facility. I studied French and, you know, crippled my way through a C at O grade or something. But I'm desperately interested in language, and now I feel as if signing, I watch it. You know, we all see people. You know, sometimes it catches your eye that two people or whatever are communicating in that way, and I genuinely feel, and I realise that over the years I have felt inspired to learn to communicate by sign, perhaps in a way that I haven't felt inspired to communicate by learning another language. Although clearly signing is another language. So I think maybe the appetite, it's very human to want to communicate with someone. When you see a conversation going on, and you see that going on, I want in.
Yeah,
you know, when you see people doing it and you think,
exactly.
Goodness, that's clever. That's
it is clever.
I wonder what that's all about, and I want in on it. I don't want to be excluded from it.
Where would you go? Because I know that I could download Duolingo or whatever to learn French. So is there a good place that we can all do some basics?
Oh.
I mean, some local councils offer sign language to the families of deaf children, but you know, these days you can Google anything. You know, go to the National Deaf Children's Society website, go to other websites, and there are people who will teach British Sign Language.
I'm trying to be optimistic this evening in various topics. I'm trying to look for the light. Are there reasons to be optimistic? I mean, do you have hopes that this situation, which is a bit broken at the moment, are there signs of the green shoots of new growth?
So yes, I'm optimistic. It's a bit of a cliche, isn't it? And I say this with great nervousness. It's a bit of a cliche to say there's a responsibility for the government here, but as we speak, you know, the government is consulting on its green paper proposals how the education system should work, you know, for children with additional educational needs. And there are some really positive things in there for deaf children. You know, there's a commitment, and this is something parents feel really strongly about, to have, you know, clear expectations about the support their child should receive. That there's the promise held out that there can be a proper progress check, for deaf children when they reach the age of 2. There's a commitment to an improved system of careers advice, because careers advice, for deaf young people is absolutely lousy. But there are bits that are missing as well. The government still hasn't picked up, the baton on deaf awareness within teacher training, and it hasn't picked up the need for more specialist teachers of the deaf. So I think we're halfway there, but the government's got to move just a little bit more.
You mentioned something that really struck a chord with me during lockdown and the masking. And I was made aware for various reasons of what an impact that had, not just on children who are actually deaf, but any kind of hearing impairment at all. So many people rely on a kind of lip reading, whether they know they were doing that or not. And that the masking was quite catastrophic for so many people, children among them. And I wonder if the lockdown experience will have turned a new light on the plight of deaf children in the way that the lockdown predicament has turned up and made us think differently about so many things.
I think it has. I mean, deaf children have struggled for far too long with an education system that isn't really geared to their needs. And what deaf young people say to me is that they haven't been supported in the way that they would like by the education system. And we're predominantly the family of the charity of the families, and the parents complain. But because face masks have been such a visible symbol of the struggle that deaf children have, to understand what their teachers are saying, whether it's lip reading, understanding gestures or emotions or even smiles. I think it has shone that light, and it has brought to the fore the fact that deaf children have the right to the same quality of education that all of their hearing friends get.
Absolutely, they have the right. Thank you so much. It's a subject that's really, I don't know, it has moved me and inspired me, so thank you very much for coming in and
thank you.
Shining a light on it. Thank you. Most important. After the break, last but not least tonight, Britain's oldest gorilla has turned 40. It's a sentence I never thought I'd hear myself say. not under any circumstances. We'll find out how he enjoyed the celebrations. Frankly, I dread to think.
Yeah.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you, or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back to Neil Oliver Live. OK, here we go. Britain's oldest gorilla has celebrated his 40th birthday, complete with cake and a present for every year of his life. He's called Pertinax. That's the name of a Roman emperor, successor to Commodus, I think, a West Lowland gorilla. And he's been at Paignton Zoo in Devon since he was 15, just a teenage lad. Over the years, Pertinax has been involved in the upbringing of younger males, teaching them the ways of gorilla world and gorilla etiquette. Who knew there was gorilla etiquette? But there is. Of course there is. Now an elder statesman, he's said to be contemplating retirement and a quieter stage of his life. Joining me now to talk about Pertinax's birthday celebrations is senior keeper of apes at Paignton Zoo, Gemma Keohane. Am I saying that correctly, Gemma?
Got it, first try.
Good, glad to hear it. Thank you for joining us. I love this story. I'll make no bones about it. I've seen the images that we have. I'm going to ask you right away, what presents do you give for a 40-year-old gorilla?
Well, like you said, we had 40 presents. Normally the gorillas are on a vegetable-only diet, but you don't turn 40 every day. So we did treat Pert, and he had a few little treats in his presents that you wouldn't normally get on a day-to-day basis.
We're looking at pictures of. Am I right in describing Pertinax as a silverback? He certainly looks like a silverback. Are you still there, Jim?
Boy. Yes, I am. Yes, can you hear me?
Am I right in describing Pertinax as a silverback gorilla? He looks like a very mature chap.
You are, yeah. So male gorillas are classed as silverbacks as soon as they mature. So normally around 14 or 15 years old, they get that characteristic silverback.
What is his character and temperament nowadays? I understand he's been in the zoo for all of that time. How is he to be around?
He's a lovely, lovely boy. So when you first start working with him, he does test you a little bit. I think he kind of gets a kick out of scaring new keepers. But you really have to work at that bond with him. It doesn't come easy. But once you kind of break through the exterior, he's a big softie underneath.
How many gorillas are at Paignton? I'm looking at the pictures of him walking about with presents in his mouth. How many gorillas are at Paignton? Is it a complete sort of family community? You know, females, males, infants, whatever.
No, so we've got 4 gorillas at Paignton. So Pert lives on his own, and then we have 3 brothers that live together that form our bachelor group. So about 5 years ago, Pertinax was still actually in that bachelor group, heading the bachelor group. But as the 3 boys started to mature, they decided it might be a good idea for them to have a go at kind of being the head. So Pertinax kind of got a bit pushed around, and basically he was ousted from the group. We like to think that he kind of made that decision to leave the group, and it was kind of all on his terms. So from that point forward, we kind of ran them as 2 groups, and he loves life now. He has no stresses. He doesn't have to worry about keeping the boys in check. It's all just he can do things in his own time.
But I would have imagined that he's a very social, that gorillas are very sociable animals that live in families. Well, is loneliness not going to be a problem for Pertinax if he's been ousted from a group and he's out?
We don't think so. He still sees the boys, so he still lives in the same building as the boys, and he has mesh-to-mesh contact. So he still sees them. They still talk to each other. So gorillas do a noise that's called a rumble, which is like a happy noise. So normally when they're eating, they'll do a rumble. And if Pert rumbles, the boys will rumble back to him. So he still does get that social interaction, just not the physical interaction. But that's for his well-being, basically, for his safety.
Gemma, if you bear with me, I'm going to invite some comments from my guests here in the studio, Jasmine and Emma. It's amazing we've done pieces in the past about big cats, often in unhappy circumstances, it has to be said, but we have gorillas in our midst.
Absolutely.
There he's been since he was 15 years old. He's been there living his guerrilla life.
He's living his best guerrilla life, isn't he? And I can say to Pertinax, as someone who started to live alone again at 39, he's got the best years ahead of him. Honestly, he really has. He seems like a happy chap. And I think gorillas have a real place in our heart, don't they? Because they feel so like us. And I think that's why the classic David Attenborough footage of him with the gorilla. I just think they have that just lively sense of personality in them.
I love the fact, chimpanzees are obviously fascinating endlessly, but, they have that, they're our closest relatives and they have that aggression and they can be destructively, terrifyingly violent. On the other hand, gorillas aren't like that. Although they're bigger, and you'd think looking at them that they pose the bigger sort of King Kong threat, but they're biddable and given to a peaceful way of life.
They do come across as very family oriented, which to be honest is why I'm a little bit sorry that there aren't females there. I don't know quite why that would I would like to have heard that there were females.
Gemma, that's a good point actually that Jasmine raises. Why is Pertinax, why has he always been part of a kind of a monastic population there? Why only boys and bachelors and teenage lads? Why has it not been a family life?
So that's probably one of the most common questions we actually get at the zoo. Why aren't there any females? So in the captive population of gorillas, there's roughly a 50-50 chance that a female is going to have a male offspring. And gorillas live in what's called harems. So it's one male to multiple females. So unfortunately, that means there just aren't as many places for males in the captive population, but they have to go somewhere. And bachelor groups do exist in the wild. So they kind of work as well in captivity. So young gorillas generally are kind of ousted from their family group when they're anything from kind of 6 years up, basically, depending on how tolerant their father is. But at that age, obviously, they're way too young to head up their own group. So there has to be kind of go in that limbo.
But he's been involved, and they are available, as it were, for breeding programmes. I'm being as polite as I can be about this. I'm presuming that they get involved in the procreation of the species somehow.
They do, yeah. So bachelor groups generally exist for the males to mature, and once they are mature, generally they will then be placed. But they have to go somewhere in that interim, and that's why bachelor groups work so well, because males do generally get on if there's no females to compete over.
That's made me feel so much better for Pertinax. That's really more than his birthday. Thank you, Gemma. That's all from me on Neil Oliver Live tonight. Thanks as always to Emma Burnell, Jasmine Birtles, and next up, of course, it's the one and only Mark Dolan tonight. Thank you.
Looking ahead to tomorrow's weather, and the UK is looking dry and bright for many, but there will be some outbreaks of rain over Northern Ireland and Western Scotland. Let's take a look at the details. It'll be a cloudy start in the southwest with a little coastal mist and fog in the west. Quickly brightening up though with some sunny spells developing especially in the east. The southeast will start a little chilly, but it'll be dry with plenty of sunshine. Some high cloud will turn the sunshine hazy at times. It'll be a rather cloudy start across South Wales with some coastal mist likely in the west. Soon brightening up though with sunny spells developing. The northwest of England will start Easter Sunday on a dry and bright note. It'll be mild and the cloud will tend to thin and break with sunny spells developing through the morning. It's a similar start for the northeast. It'll be dry and bright, but the sunshine will be hazy to start due to the high cloud. But sunny.
On Mark Dolan tonight, my Mark Meets guest is Benidorm star Chrissy Rock. She'll tell us what life's like on the set of one of Britain's most popular sitcoms. In the big
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.